Today I want to talk about scapular dyskinesis and if it's a real thing or not. Now, before we begin, we need to know what is typically considered normal. And to get that number, we need to go all the way back almost a century to 1944, where it was established that a 2-to-1 ratio is the normal scapulohumeral rhythm. That means that for every 2 degrees your arm moves, your shoulder blade moves 1 degree. And anything outside of that ratio is considered abnormal or unstable. Now, if you were listening close, I said that was almost a century ago, and there's been a lot of research done between then and now. So let's see if that number is held up throughout the years. To start, I kind of want to get after that definition of unstable first. So when we're talking about regular joints, unstable is when they're a little bit lax and they can easily dislocate or sublux. And when we're talking about the shoulder blade, it's held together by muscles and ligaments, so that classic definition of instability doesn't hold up. So already there's some holes in the definition of scapular dyskinesis. So if we look at the evidence surrounding the ratio, we can see in a pain-free healthy population that it spans all the way from 1-to-1 to 6-to-1. So that's a pretty big difference from the originally stated 2-to-1 ratio. And again, these are all pain-free healthy individuals. Now you may be wondering, or if you're a healthcare practitioner who still believes in scapular dyskinesis, you may be angrily shouting, well, if you have the variation from the 2-to-1 ratio, are you going to develop shoulder pain in the future? Luckily, we have some studies that have explored this, and they all have shown no, that's not really the case. If you vary from this 2-to-1 ratio, it's not going to cause you shoulder problems in the future. So already we have one point kind of showing, hey, you don't need to worry as much about your shoulder blade and how it moves. Also, when we look at interventions that try to change how the shoulder blade moves, we actually see that people come in pain, they have this variation in the ratio, and then when they leave the study pain-free, they still have the same shoulder blade movement. So these interventions don't actually change how your shoulder blade moves. Again, another point showing, hey, you don't really need to be concerned with how your shoulder moves. And then finally, if we look at different strengthening interventions, so just general strengthening or general strengthening and stabilization exercises, they have the exact same outcomes. So there's no actual extra benefit to adding these stabilization exercises. And all that you're really doing is spending more time and energy doing these exercises when you could just be getting stronger and getting nice big shoulders. So now that I've talked about this in general terms, I want to talk about how it relates to rehab for rotator cuff tears. So rehab for rotator cuff tears often includes a lot of scapular stabilization exercises and trying to restore normal shoulder blade movements. This is largely due to some of the most influential studies using these as part of their rehab protocol. And in my opinion, as well as the opinion of a lot of the evidence that I've already brought up, these stabilization exercises don't add anything to the rehab. And due to the lack of general strengthening, and another important point that I'm about to bring up, these stabilization exercises could actually be taking away from some of the positive outcomes. So that important point is that when you have a rotator cuff tear, the way your shoulder moves or the kinematics of your shoulder changes. And these changes are seen as a positive adaptation. This means that by trying to restore normal movement, you're actually going against a positive adaptation and could have negative impacts on the rehab. Rehab for rotator cuff tears and shoulder ailments in general could potentially be better if you just focus on proper graded exposure and progressive overload instead of trying to fix how the shoulder moves. Now, there should be a few takeaways from this video. First is that normal scapulohumeral rhythm is a huge range, and scapular dyskinesis isn't really a thing. Second, you shouldn't really be concerned with how your shoulder blade moves, since this isn't a predictor of pain, and building stronger shoulders is a little bit more important. And finally, if your healthcare practitioner or trainer is trying to focus on and change how your shoulder blade moves, then they aren't up to date with the literature, and you might want to consider finding someone who is. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you learned something today. Now it's time to get out there, move, and grow a stronger body.